The mole went on last. Zara pressed it into place with the tip of her ring finger, a pea-sized disc of champagne-colored latex, positioned at the exact corner of her mouth where it would catch every eye and hold it there, wrong and unavoidable. She studied her reflection without blinking. The unibrow sat heavy and dark across her brow, built from coarse adhesive fiber. The neon green eyeshadow blazed across her lids like a highway warning. The mustard stain on her collar had been applied with a fan brush for even, convincing coverage. She looked, objectively, like a fever dream. "Perfect," she said to no one. She picked up the garlic and onion bagel from the corner of her work table, wrapped it in a paper towel, and dropped it into her bag. She told herself it was a prop. She ate half of it in the car. Here is what Zara Cole knew about Jae-won Oh before she ever sat across from him. He ran the most quietly terrifying intelligence brokerage in Harlow. He did not threaten people. He simply possessed information that made threats unnecessary. He had been trying to meet with her for 6 months, sending requests through channels she ignored and intermediaries she refused, and somewhere in the language of his persistence was a word that felt uncomfortably like ownership. She was not interested in being owned. So she had spent 6 hours engineering herself into the most aggressively unappealing version of a human being she could technically construct, because if there was one thing Zara Cole understood completely, it was that appearance was a language. And she intended to say, loudly and without room for interpretation, "There is nothing here you want." The Meridian Room had no sign outside. You found it by the type of car at the curb and the way the host looked through you before deciding whether you existed. Zara was escorted past the main dining room, past expensive glass clinking softly and conversations that made deals sound like weather, through a corridor lined with silk panels to a private section at the back. Table 9. She smelled cedar first, then something cold like mountain air trapped in expensive fabric. She saw him before he turned. He was Korean, lean and precise, with the kind of stillness that felt deliberately cultivated rather than natural. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that fit him the way suits fit men who have never needed to impress anyone. Built on him, not bought for him. Collar buttoned to the top. No tie, no jewelry. His jet black hair was cut in a clean undercut, neat and sharp at the sides, slightly longer on top, and swept back without a single strand out of place. His jaw was angular and defined. His eyes were dark, deep-set, and intensely still, the kind of eyes that appeared to be processing everything and revealing nothing. He watched her pull out the chair. He watched her sit. He watched her take a slow, deliberate, extremely audible bite of the garlic bagel. He did not react. Zara felt the first cold thread of unease move through her chest. She ignored it. He studied her. She counted 1, 2, 3, all the way to 12, watching his eyes move across the unibrow, the green shadow, the mustard, the mole. His expression did not shift. Not a flinch. Not a flicker. Nothing. Then he picked up the linen napkin, folded it once along its crease, and with the precise, unhurried movement of a man returning a library book, reached across the table and removed the latex mole from her face. He set it on the white tablecloth between them. He slid a folder across. "The contract is prepared for Friday," he said. His voice was low and even, the kind that never needed to rise to be heard. "My legal team will contact yours." Zara stared at the mole, at the folder, at the man who had just dismantled 6 hours of meticulous, humiliating, brilliant work with a napkin and a single sentence. She would spend weeks mapping the exact dimensions of how completely wrong she had been. But before she could speak, before she could salvage a single fragment of the plan she had arrived with, he folded his hands on the table and looked at her with something that existed between amusement and warmth and said, "You are very good at making people look like someone they're not." He paused. "You're less practiced at hiding yourself." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Zara had heard in years. If you're new here and this story already has you, hit subscribe right now. New stories drop every week, and you do not want to miss what happens next. 6 months before Table 9, Zara was backstage at the Harlow Arts Center doing touch-up work on a creature prosthetic she had spent 11 days building. The production was a reimagined fairy tale, dark, modern, precise. The creature's face was a 6-piece silicone appliance with hand-punched hair follicles and a jaw extension that allowed full expression. She had mixed the pigment directly into the silicone, so the color lived inside the skin instead of sitting on top of it. Under stage lights, it moved like something alive. Directors had asked her to leave the room before actors saw themselves in it, because the first reaction was always the same: pure, involuntary terror. She lived for that reaction. She was resealing the edge of the left cheek piece when the east stage door opened. The man who entered was Korean, tall for it, lean and angular, moving with the controlled economy of someone who had learned to cross every room by calculating every person in it as a variable. His face was striking in a way that was difficult to immediately categorize. Sharp jaw, straight strong nose, dark eyes with an alertness that felt less like curiosity and more like permanent assessment. He was dressed in a dark navy overcoat and moved like he was always one decision ahead of whatever room he stood in. 2 other men came through the main door 30 seconds later, moving faster, less controlled. Their eyes swept the backstage space in sharp, practiced arcs. Zara did not think. She stepped forward, put a hand on the man's arm, pulled him behind a large prop tree, and said very quietly, "Sit. Close your eyes." He looked at her for exactly 2 seconds. Then he sat, and he closed his eyes. She would think about that later, the complete, unhesitating trust of it. A man who made half of Harlow's most powerful people genuinely nervous, closing his eyes in an unfamiliar room because a stranger told him to. She didn't know what it meant yet. She only knew it was significant. She worked fast. She thinned his already sharp brows with a flat brush, added a temporary silicone nose extension, subtle, just enough to break the clean line of his profile, built slight texture at the corners of his eyes in 40 seconds with a stipple sponge, dusted his face to shift his overall tone. When the 2 men swept through the backstage area scanning for him, they passed within 4 feet. They kept walking. She handed him a compact mirror when they were gone. He studied his reflection for a long moment. Then he said, "You're good." "I'm aware," she said, and went back to the jaw extension. She heard him move toward the east exit. "Thank you," he said. She said nothing. She was already back in her work the way she always returned to her work, completely without remainder, because her work was the only thing in her life that never asked her for more than she had. He left, and that, she assumed, was the end of it. It was not the end of it. She did not know that as he walked out of the Harlow Arts Center that evening, Jae-won Oh made a quiet, private, entirely unhurried decision to find out everything there was to know about the woman who had hidden him in plain sight without asking a single question. She did not know he spent the following weeks learning her work. The creature builds, the film credits she'd been denied, the agency that had used her designs without her name, the portfolio of brilliance she carried alone and mostly broke. She did not know he had quietly, methodically removed the financing obstacle on a major production she had been chasing for 3 years, 3 weeks before their restaurant meeting. She knew none of this. What she knew was that 6 months later she had sat across from him. He had removed a latex mole from her face, and now she was supposed to spend 3 months in his estate under a contract her lawyer had read twice and pronounced legitimate. The money was extraordinary. The terms were clean. The man himself, Jae-won Oh, Korean, precise, impossible to read. She had decided with great confidence she would never engage with beyond the absolute professional minimum. That resolution lasted 4 days. Cross House was a converted Victorian on the north edge of Harlow's art district. It looked like a building that had spent decades absorbing secrets and decided to keep them all. High ceilings, dark wood floors, hallways that turned where you didn't expect them to. On her 3rd day, a steward knocked and delivered a package. She opened it. Inside was a dress. Formal. Lilac. A size 2. Zara held it at arm's length. She was a size 8. She wore jewel tones. The dress was not an accident. It was a message, and she couldn't decide yet whether it was contempt, a test, or a spectacular miscalculation from someone who had made an assumption and gotten it spectacularly wrong. She put the dress back in the box. She found her best calligraphy pen. She wrote "Return to Sender" on the lid in slow, deliberate strokes. She set the box outside her door. She hung her own emerald-wrapped dress in the wardrobe. Whatever game this was, she had made her move. The Harlow Heritage Gala was held on the ground floor of the estate 2 days later. 200 people who moved through the world like chess pieces, deliberate, positioned, always aware of the board. Zara arrived on the arm of Tobias Reed, a theater director she had worked with for 6 years, who introduced her to 3 people in the first 10 minutes with the genuine enthusiasm of someone who believed she was the most talented person in any room she entered. She was standing near the east windows with sparkling water when Jae-won appeared at her right shoulder. He didn't announce himself. She felt the air change, the particular shift that happened when someone who carried real weight moved into your immediate space. He was in a dark charcoal suit again, collar-buttoned, the same clean undercut, the same complete absence of decoration. He looked like a man who had decided years ago exactly what he was and saw no reason to revise it. "You wore the other dress," he said. "I did," she said. A pause. Then, "Good." She turned to look at him. He was watching the room, not her, but something in the set of his jaw told her he was entirely aware of every word between them. Over the next 40 minutes, he introduced her to 5 different people, not as his guest, as Zara Cole, the artist who built the creature prosthetics for the Meridian stage production that shut down opening night because the cast couldn't stop laughing at each other's reflections. Each introduction carried her name like it was worth something. She was being claimed. She understood that clearly. She was less certain how she felt about it. Do-yoon Choi found her at the drinks table. He was Korean, lean and well-dressed, with a long, angular face and sharp features that would have been handsome if they weren't arranged into an expression that arrived half a second before it was meant to. He wore a rich, burgundy suit jacket, dark shirt underneath, and had the particular manner of someone who had spent a long time being the most trusted person in a room and had learned to wear that trust like a weapon. "You're very talented," he said. "Harlow is full of talented people who thought they were here to stay." Zara reached past him for the water. "That's an interesting thing to say at a party. Do you do birthday toasts too?" Do-yoon did not laugh. He held her eyes for 3 seconds too long. Enough to confirm this was not small talk, and moved away. Jae-won was at her side within 30 seconds. "What did he say?" he asked. "That talented people don't last here." Jae-won said nothing. His jaw tightened once, briefly. She filed it away. Later, when the gala had thinned to a quieter crowd, she stood at the far window looking at the estate gardens. The topiary along the south wall was cut into a shape she couldn't identify, somewhere between a lion and a very confused shrub. Jae-won joined her. "What is that supposed to be?" she asked. "A horse," he said. "Originally. It doesn't look like a horse." It hasn't looked like a horse in 40 years. The original gardener misread the blueprint. Nobody wanted to tell the family. Why not just fix it? He was quiet a moment, because by now it's the original. 40 years makes a mistake into an intention. She looked at him. He kept watching the garden. "That's either very wise," she said, "or very convenient." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but close enough that she noticed it, and the fact that she noticed it was its own kind of problem. She was beginning to find him genuinely interesting. She catalogued this the way she catalogued everything that could go wrong mid-build. Noted, filed, to be handled before it caused structural damage. She did not handle it. 3 weeks into her residency, late on a Tuesday evening, she walked to the archive corridor to retrieve a reference notebook she'd left on a shelf near the east door. The corridor had the acoustic property of a confessional. Sound traveled in both directions with perfect, terrible clarity. And what she heard, standing motionless in the half-dark between shelving units, made the temperature in her chest drop several degrees before the vault at the far end did the same to the rest of her. It was Do-yoon's voice, and the other voice, the one she recognized with a slow, nauseating certainty that arrived before her mind had finished forming the thought, was her stepsister Brianna. Brianna was feeding Do-yoon details about Zara's professional contacts. In return, Do-yoon was giving Brianna the archive vault security rotation, the camera blind spots, the restricted access schedule, the plan, pieced together from fragments carried through that terrible corridor acoustics, was to make Zara appear untrustworthy to Jae-won at a critical point in the contract. The kind of sabotage that doesn't arrive with noise, that just makes things quietly, irreversibly worse. Small, precise, personal. Zara stood motionless until the voices faded. Then she walked back to her workroom, picked up her sculpting tool, and started building an ear. She had learned over years of working with volatile materials and directors who changed their minds at 2 a.m. that the first response to a shock was almost never the right one. She needed to think. She needed to be sure of the shape of what she was holding before she moved with it. She did not go to Jae-won. Not yet. 3 days later, on a Thursday morning, her phone stopped working. Not the battery. Not the signal. Something more deliberate. Texts showed no delivery. Calls routed to a silence that felt arranged. She stood in the hallway outside her workroom and noticed, with the careful attention she gave to everything, that the estate felt different. Quieter in the wrong way. Do-yoon appeared at the end of the hall, unhurried, a key card between his fingers. He was composed and neat as always. Dark slim trousers, a fitted gray shirt, his straight black hair swept back without effort. The kind of man who looked the same at every hour, which she had once read as reliability and now read as control. "The reference archive is open for you today," he said. "Mr. Oh thought you'd want access to the full costume documentation." Zara looked at the key card. She looked at Do-yoon. She thought of the corridor, of Brianna's voice, of the careful, patient construction of something designed to undo her. "I'm good for today, thanks," she said, and turned back toward her room. She felt his smile on the back of her neck as she walked away. She went to the archive corridor 20 minutes later anyway, not the vault, just the corridor, to retrieve her notebook. She was not going anywhere near that vault. She knew what it was. She had heard the plan, but the door sealed behind her before she reached the shelf. A slow pneumatic hiss, final and absolute. She turned. The door she'd come through was closed. The vault at the far end breathed cold air into the corridor like something exhaling. She stood between the two with no exit, no phone signal, and the temperature already beginning to drop. For 3 seconds, Zara Cole felt pure, physical, body-wide fear, the kind that arrives before thinking. Then she put it away. The vault was approximately 40 feet deep, climate-controlled for document preservation, between 60 and 65 degrees Fahrenheit. She was in a silk blouse and slim trousers. No jacket, no scarf. Cold enough to matter. Cold enough to become a problem if nobody came. She swept the interior methodically. Near the back wall, half behind a fire suppression cabinet, she found a red panel. Emergency ventilation override. She pulled it. Somewhere she couldn't see, a maintenance alert registered on an estate-wide system she had no way of knowing about. She did not know that Jae-won wore a watch that received estate alerts. She did not know he was 2 floors up reviewing documents when his wrist vibrated. She did not know he set the papers down and looked for Do-yoon immediately. What she knew was that she was cold and isolated and that someone she had allowed close had used that closeness as a weapon. She sat on the floor, back against the shelving, knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped around herself. And she started rebuilding the corridor conversation piece by piece, the way she rebuilt everything without sentiment, methodically, until she could see the whole shape of it. Brianna had been doing this for a long time. That was obvious now. The money Zara had been sending home for years, the requests that always arrived right before a major job, the language of family deployed with such practiced ease. All of it had been running alongside something colder that Zara had not let herself see. She had known, somewhere below knowing. She had chosen not to look. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs to slow the shivering, and she thought about the topiary, about 40 years, making a mistake into an intention, about the version of herself who kept accepting things, kept covering costs, kept choosing peace over the conversation she should have been having, and whether that version was making a choice at all or simply refusing to make one. Above her, 2 floors up, Jae-won Oh found Do-yoon Choi at the security terminal, fingers already moving to cancel the maintenance alert. Their eyes met. "Don't," Jae-won said. One word. Quiet. Absolute. Do-yoon's hand stopped, and in the silence that followed, something between them. 11 years of proximity, loyalty, a devotion that had curdled slowly into something controlling and afraid, reached its end. Quick pause. Drop a comment right now and tell me where in the world you're watching this from and what time it is. This story is reaching people all over the globe right now, and I want to know where you are. And if you haven't liked this video yet, do it now. It genuinely helps more people find stories like this one. The vault corridor unsealed with the same pneumaticus that had closed it. Jae-won was through the door before the pressure fully equalized. He found Zara sitting cross-legged on the floor between 2 shelving units, back straight, chin level, breathing in 4-count intervals like someone who had decided composure was a deliberate choice she was making with every breath. Her arms were wrapped around herself. Her hands were pale from the cold, but her face was calm. She looked up at him. "You got the alert," she said. Not a question. He crossed the room without answering, shrugged off his jacket in one motion, and knelt so his eyes were exactly level with hers, and draped the jacket around her shoulders. He did not make it a gesture. He did not perform it. He just did it the way you do something when the reason is so obvious it needs no announcement. Zara felt something move through her chest that she was not prepared to name. "Cold," she said. "Not hurt." "I know," he said. He stayed where he was, crouched in front of her, elbows on his knees, looking at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Not the controlled stillness of the restaurant or the gala. Something quieter. Something that looked, against every expectation she had arrived with, like genuine concern. "Do-yoon locked me in," she said. "I know. He's been working with my stepsister. 3 days ago, I heard them in the corridor. He was giving her the vault rotations, the camera blind spots, the access schedule. They were going to use it to make you doubt the contract. To make you doubt me." Jae-won listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for 11 seconds. She counted everyone. "Do-yoon has known me for 11 years, he said finally. Not a defense. The sound of a man accounting for something painful. "I know," she said. "That's why it hurt him when you changed. He was loyal to a version of you that didn't need anyone. When that started shifting, he didn't know how to be loyal to someone different. The only way he could think to protect what he had was to remove what was changing. A silence. This one different from the first. "I didn't know I was changing," Jae-won said. "I know that too," she said. He stood. He offered her his hand. She took it, and he pulled her to her feet, and he held her hand for 3 seconds longer than was strictly necessary before releasing it. Neither of them remarked on those 3 seconds. Do-yoon's credentials were revoked within the hour. His name was removed from every active system on the estate. There was no confrontation, no raised voices. Jae-won sent a letter that evening. Zara saw it on his desk, unsealed, that acknowledged 11 years of work and released Do-yoon with full severance and no public reproach. It was the kindest and most devastating thing she had ever watched a person do. She went back to her workroom and built a nose for 3 hours and thought about almost nothing else. The next morning, Zara's stepmother called twice. Then Brianna. She let all 3 go to voicemail and felt something she had not felt in 3 years. A lightness in her chest where the obligation used to live. She did not need to know, yet, what Jae-won had arranged on her behalf. She only knew that when two members of his legal team met with her stepmother and Brianna that afternoon. Both women left the estate 40 minutes later wearing the particular pallor of people who have just discovered that the leverage they arrived with was already evidence in someone else's filing. Later, Zara would learn that Brianna had been selling her portfolio concepts, her creature designs, her original work, ideas she had developed over years, to a competing design house for 14 months, claiming them as her own and collecting both the credit and the money while Zara fell behind on her equipment lease. She had known somewhere beneath knowing. She had chosen not to look. That was the last time she made that choice. Jae-won came to her workroom the following morning. She heard him stop in the doorway and didn't turn because she had learned his particular weight in a room. "Your stepsister was plagiarizing your work," he said. "Our legal team filed an intellectual property claim this morning." She set down her sculpting tool. "How long have you known?" "About the plagiarism?" 3 weeks. "About your portfolio, the actual work itself?" "Since the night backstage." She turned. He was standing in the doorway looking at her workroom the way people look at a space that tells them something they weren't expecting. The reference walls covered in faces, the shelf of creature maquettes, the 8 types of adhesive lined up by viscosity, like a personal taxonomy. A world built by someone who paid extraordinary attention to everything. "You signed the contract at the restaurant," she said slowly, "before you even knew me properly." "I signed it because of what you did backstage," he said. "You hid me without calculating what it was worth. You didn't ask who I was or what I could offer you. You just helped." He paused. "I don't encounter that. I wanted to be in a room again with someone who could do something like that." Zara looked at him for a long moment. "That might be the most honest thing you've said to me," she said. "I'm aware," he said, and for the first time they both almost smiled. He showed her the studio that afternoon. It was the room adjacent to hers, a door she had assumed was storage and never tried. He opened it without ceremony and stepped aside so she could walk in first. She stood in the doorway and could not move. The lighting was full spectrum, adjustable by color temperature in 2-degree increments, the kind that let you match daylight at noon or tungsten at midnight, the kind serious prosthetic artists spent years arguing they needed and almost never got. The ventilation ran independently from the rest of the estate to prevent latex off-gassing. The mold storage system was built into the north wall, labeled and organized by material type. Along the south wall, a working reference library, not decorative, not chosen for aesthetics, but dense with prosthetic technique manuals, pathology references, historical creature design documentation, materials science journals. Someone had paid attention, not to what a workspace should look like, to what her workspace specifically needed to be. "When did you build this?" she asked. "Before you arrived," he said. She walked slowly to the center of the room and stood there. The feeling that moved through her was not gratitude exactly. It was more overwhelming and more complicated than that. It was the feeling of being seen at a level of specificity she had not expected from anyone, and certainly not from him. It undid something she had been keeping tightly knotted for a very long time. "There's something else," he said. He crossed to the work table and slid a folder toward her. She opened it. Inside was an international co-production contract. 6 film fantasy series. 3 countries. For years. Head of prosthetics, her name, her rate, her creative authority over the department. She read the date in the top right corner twice. "For months ago." "You've been pursuing this production for 3 years," he said. The financing kept collapsing because of a conflict of interest between one of the executive producers and the lead distributor. "I had the information to resolve it. I was waiting for the right moment to tell you." What was the right moment? He looked at her steadily. "When you trusted me enough to tell me you were afraid of something." "I'm not," she started. "You are," he said, not unkindly. "You're afraid that if someone does something for you, it means they own a piece of you, that accepting help is the same as being in debt. You've been living that way for a long time." She didn't answer because she couldn't argue it. "This isn't a transaction," he said. It was never a transaction. I opened a door because I wanted you to walk through it. That's the whole of it. She looked down at her name on the contract. At 3 years of chasing this exact thing sitting quietly in her hands. I don't know how to do this, she said. I don't know how to just receive something without looking for what it costs. Neither do I, he said. With everyone else, I always know the cost. With you, that calculation keeps failing. I've tried it 6 times. You keep coming back as something different. She looked up. Maybe stop calculating. He said nothing, but something in his face shifted, small and real, the way things shift when a wall moves an inch. The rooftop garden was accessible through a door on the 3rd floor that most of the staff never used. In the late afternoon, it caught the light in that particular golden way that made Harlow feel briefly like a city that deserved better stories than it usually told. Zara was already there when he found her. She stood at the low stone wall, turning something between her fingers. He saw what it was before he reached her. The champagne-colored latex mole, the one he had removed at the restaurant 8 weeks ago and set on the white tablecloth. She had pocketed it. He hadn't noticed, or he had noticed and said nothing, because some things are worth holding quietly. I kept it, she said without turning. I don't throw away my work. I know, he said. She turned and looked at him in the golden light and said the thing she had been carrying since the vault. I know how to survive. I know how to protect myself. I know how to make people see whatever I need them to see. She held the mole in her open palm. I don't know how to just be seen, without designing it, without choosing which version of me is visible. She paused. You keep seeing me anyway, and I genuinely don't know what to do with that. He was quiet a moment. I've built my entire life around knowing things before other people do, he said, around never being surprised. And then you sat down across from me, looking like a very committed Halloween costume, and I felt... He stopped. What? She said. Interested, he said, in a way I didn't have a category for. She laughed, a real laugh, sudden and completely unguarded, and the sound of it surprised her almost as much as it surprised him. She held out the mole. He looked at it, this small, ridiculous, champagne-colored disc that had started everything, and took it from her palm. And as he did, his face broke open quietly, not dramatically, not all at once, just the way a room opens when someone finally finds the right key. He smiled, a real smile, the kind that had nothing to do with strategy or management or how he was perceived. It rearranged his entire face, and she watched it happen with precise, technical attention and something that had absolutely nothing to do with technique at all. He stepped forward. The kiss was not dramatic. It was quiet and warm and unhurried, the way things are when the decision has already been made and only the moment is catching up. She felt his hand come up to her jaw, gentle, certain, and she stopped calculating anything at all. 60 days later, Jae-won Oh filed the first restructuring documents that would begin transforming the Meridian Group from a shadow intelligence operation into a legitimate consulting firm. His legal team thought it was strategy. His clients thought it was a warning. He clarified neither reading. The truth was simpler. He had sat in a cold vault at midnight next to a woman rebuilding understanding from thin air and a ventilation switch, and he had thought, clearly for the first time in a decade, that he had built his empire around the accumulation of power and had never once asked what it was supposed to be for. He was beginning to have an answer. Zara hired 2 assistants from the Harlow Arts program. She had 3 builds running simultaneously. She had stopped sending money home. She was sleeping 8 hours. On a Tuesday afternoon, she was finishing a 27-piece silicone build when Jae-won appeared in her doorway. The Tokyo Summit is the 14th, he said. The production team wants to meet the head of prosthetics. I'll be done with this build by the 12th, she said. I know. I scheduled the flight around it. She looked at him. He looked at her. The room smelled of spirit gum and isopropyl alcohol and something faintly floral, the smell of her world, her work, the thing she had built with her hands and her attention and years of refusing to be smaller than she was. Neither of them said anything else. Neither needed to. She went back to work. He stayed in the doorway a moment longer, in the way people stay in rooms they don't want to leave. And then he went about his day. And that was enough. That was, in fact, everything. If this story held you all the way to the end, hit the like button right now. It costs you nothing, and it means everything for getting stories like this to more people. Drop a comment below and tell me where in the world you are watching this from and what time it is where you are right now, whether it is midnight in Seoul, sunrise in London, or a lazy afternoon in Atlanta. I want to know you are here. If you are not subscribed yet, this is your sign. New stories every single week. And stay right here because the next story is already waiting for you.